Wow, folks. So today we're going to do 10.2 notes, which is all about urban sprawl. We mentioned urban sprawl in our 10.1 notes as one of the major issues of how cities are expanding right now. In the 1950s, 65% of our population lived in an urban setting, and that includes suburbia, while 35% was rural. In 2010, 89% was urban and only 11% rural. So all of this land, this rural land, is turning into suburbia, and we're losing those green spaces at an alarming rate. So what exactly is sprawl? It's the spread of low density, and by low density I mean you have an individual house with a small individual yard. Low density urban or suburban development outwards from a dense urban core. So dense urban core is more like your skyscrapers where you have large apartment buildings with many floors of housing, right? So sprawl gives you more space per person, but that space comes at an expense to the green areas surrounding the city. All right, so if you look below at the expansion of Las Vegas, you can see the city center has spread widely out, and that these areas that had other land uses now are used for urban areas. So the biggest contributor to sprawl has to do with population growth. As the population expands, they have to find places to live, and the cities cannot always accommodate them depending on the infrastructure. And so when you have sprawl, that increases your land consumption per person, because now you have individual homes that house only one family, or in some cases one person, with little yards associated with them, which are not enough green space to have any impact really on our carbon that we're producing. So two factors are really important to cause sprawl, but one may be more important than another in a specific city. So that really depends on the demographics of the city that you're looking at. Like other things that can play a role in sprawl is socioeconomics. Because in order to sprawl, you have to have more resources. You have to own a vehicle so that you can get back and forth to your job in the city, and you also have to be able to afford a single family home. So socioeconomics also plays a big role in this. So patterns of sprawl. Here's all the patterns of sprawl, and I'm going to show you pictures afterwards. So you can have an uncentered commercial strip development. So this is kind of like Orange Ave going out of Roanoke County into Botetourt County, where the businesses are arranged along a strip with no central community that's associated with those businesses. What that means is that you're reliant on fossil fuel transportation, usually single-use vehicles, to get in and out of those areas to do your shopping, instead of having your shopping associated with a community that can walk to those resources. Then we have low density single-use residential developments. So these are usually your housing developments where you have single family homes on fairly large lots compared to like apartment living. So you're not too closely packed, but you're closely packed enough that you're still considered an urban area. Then you got scattered or leapfrog development. This is what we see in our area, where we have the building of new residences all over, like subdivisions, but no real forethought into how they're set up. So this is the case in most cases where there's some land open and a developer buys it up and they just builds a whole bunch of residential areas up there, apartments or townhouses or individual homes, and no real thought as to where it is in proximity to resources. And so that's what we're experiencing in our area, this scattered leapfrog development that's not well planned out. All right, and then we have a sparse street network. This is when roads are far enough apart that areas remain undeveloped. So basically it's hard to get to it, but not far enough apart for these areas to function as natural areas. So this is actually where I live, is considered a sparse street network. I am on the end of a housing community, a small housing community, but I'm across the street from a farm, and I'm not too far off from the Blue Ridge Parkway. And because the Blue Ridge Parkway is there, they're limited in how they can build out from there. So most of the houses in my neighborhood have a couple acres of land associated with them, but it's still on the verge of being like a housing community. So here's some pictures of these. Here's the uncentered commercial strip development, just like Orange Ave, where you have all your stores off to the side, but no set neighborhood in the middle that is dependent on those buildings. So you have to drive into those to get your resources. Here's low density single use development. So this is where you have a nice sized yard, but it's a housing community. And so within here, you have to leave this community to go get gas, to go get groceries, that it's not built into the community. And so you're very reliant on fossil fuel use yet again. Scattered leapfrog development, sometimes this can turn into a good thing just on accident. But usually when there's very little good planning and zoning going on and thoughtful step forward, that this just kind of landlocks you for any future developments where you want to make something a little bit more eco-friendly and consumer-centered. And then we got sparse street, where you get these little housing communities, but there's still large green areas. So this is better than nothing, but at the same time, you're also still super dependent on fossil fuels to get you to resources. So impacts of sprawl, we talked about some of these briefly before. Transportation with sprawl, when you're outside of the city, there's little to no public transportation. So you have to own your own vehicles and gas them up to get in and out. So you can't rely on public transportation like you could inside a city, because inside cities there's lots of public transportation, and that uses less fossil fuels to move more people. Pollution, of course, because increased driving is going to lead to more pollution, and that's what you're doing in suburbia. Public health, you're promoting activity when you live in suburbs, because you go home to your house and there's not a lot of activities going on around your home. So people tend to stay in once they get home and not drive back into the cities for recreation. And so there's also health issues associated with that. There is sometimes good things in that you can also get out and maintain your yards and stuff like that. But as a whole, you're way more active when you live in a city. Land use, less and less open space, which is the big environmental issue here. Forests and farms are usually sacrificed to produce housing communities. And then, of course, economics. So the wealth of the city tends to be concentrated in the suburbs, because you can afford to have those vehicles, you can afford those single family homes, leaving urban areas, depending on the city, more poor. And so what you'll see in very large cities, once again I talk about New York City a lot because that's the one I know, in New York City you have some parts of the city that are incredibly wealthy, like Manhattan area, and other parts that there's not much income in those areas at all, like the Bronx.